right, welcome to the show, Terry Wildman. What
It's
else
really
would you
good
like?
to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. What else would you like our listeners to know about you?
Well, my wife and I live in Maricopa, Arizona. And Maricopa, Arizona is the traditional lands of the Pima and the Tohono O'odham, who are the original native people of this land here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've I've been a Jesus follower since I was 18 years old. I've gone through a lot of changes in my life. I have I grew up in Michigan, in the land of the Anishinaabe, we say. And the Anishinaabe are the real people. I apologize to the rest of you. Um, but that's what the name means, is the people or the real people. But I grew up in Michigan, and uh, I didn't grow up in my culture, but over the years, I learned more and more about my culture. And eventually, when I was older and became a Jesus follower, Creator then called me. I over a long period of time, I learned how to hear His voice a little bit, or hear His leading, and He, through circumstances and whatever, led me to begin to reach out and learn about my native heritage,
Mm-hmm.
and then to bring Jesus into that heritage. And so that's a little bit about me. I've been mentored since that time, and in many native ways. I've had a couple different mentors, and both of them believers in Jesus, but also both of them very well versed in our native culture, or
Mm-hmm.
at least at least the Anishinaabe culture, the Ojibwe people.
Great, great. And what's different? Would you say about your faith now than your early faith?
Well, my early faith, I was just out of high school. I'm a teenager. I wanted to enjoy life. I wanted to have some fun. I wanted to, sow my oats, so to
Yeah.
speak. But
Right.
I kept hearing about this Jesus person.
Mm-hmm.
I heard it through different people. I got invited to different events, and I was drawn to the people who believed in Jesus. I was drawn to their testimony, their how they were experiencing life. But I was also uh, part of my reasoning at the time was I was a little scared of God.
Mm.
You know, I was scared of this hell they kept preaching about, and I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure I wasn't going to go there.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my idea was I wanted to get to heaven, so I'm going to accept Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But I put it off as long as I could. But I guess you'd say he just kept after me. He's real. And
Yeah.
for me, I discovered the reality of Jesus, and that's what made a difference. It was later I discovered the scriptures and all the different things, but and theology and things like that. But uh, as far as Jesus back then was about a lot about getting into heaven.
Yeah.
So the difference now is about getting heaven into me.
Hmm. Hmm.
You
I
know,
like
it's
that.
it's yeah, it's more about living in the way of Jesus and
Mm-hmm.
learning to relate to people as one who believes in we call him in the First Nation version creator sets free,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, but one who walks in his way. And what does that mean? What does that mean in this majority culture that we live in, and also what does it mean in our native culture to be a follower of the Jesus way?
Yeah. Yeah. What spiritual practices have been meaningful for you, or might you recommend to others?
Wow, spiritual practices, that's a big word. And I've never been very good at what they call the disciplines, the Christian disciplines.
Yeah.
I mean, I've tried them, and I just the day-to-day thing I've never really gotten into. So what I would say my spiritual practices that are meaningful to me is learning how to love my wife like Christ loves the church,
Right.
learning how to
Right.
take care of my children and provide for them and teach them in the Jesus way how to walk, learning how to get along with my neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
learning how to forgive people who have hurt me, learning how to get along with people I don't agree with.
Yeah.
Those are kind of my spiritual practices now that I give myself more to.
I appreciate that as someone who, like, I study family systems theory a lot. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but I think like my biggest application of that is just with my own wife, my spouse, and then my kids. And I appreciate your emphasis on like, peace starts at home. You know,
Yeah.
if we can live peacefully with our loved ones, with our neighbors, like that'll go a long way. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that. Let's talk about. So Terry is the editor or lead editor. Is that right?
Lead translator is one of the ways they describe me, and project manager for the First Nations version.
Yeah, the First Nations version, an indigenous translation of the New Testament uh, from University Press. You also do some other stuff with University. Talk about, if you would, your role with them and their native ministries and what kind of goals there.
Well, I kind of connected to InterVarsity Press through the First Nations version.
Oh,
Some of the native staff, or not InterVarsity Press, but InterVarsity Native
uh-huh.
Ministries,
Mm-hmm.
uh, um, through the First Nation version, because I was looking for, over the years that we took to translate this First Nation version, we wanted it all to be all Native people that were involved in this translation process. And so we needed a lot of reviewers. And so I was looking for young reviewers, elderly reviewers, reviewers from different denominational backgrounds and things like that. And so what happened was some of the staff of Native InterVarsity found the First Nations version.
Mm-hmm.
And they began to use it in their ministry. They began to use it in their Bible studies, and they were getting amazing feedback, is what they told me.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that, they reached out to me.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to know, well, do you have any more portions done that we could use in our Bible studies?
Mm-hmm.
Even ahead of the publication. And so what happened was I began to cultivate a relationship, and some of the native InterVarsity staff actually became some of our reviewers
Mm-hmm.
to give feedback on the translation working through Google Docs. So, being that the First Nation version is a translation by Native people and for Native people, it made a lot of sense to make those connections
Yeah.
and to develop that. And out of that, I met the leader of Native InterVarsity, Megan Krishke, and Megan, after building relationship for a time, and they invited me to be a guest speaker at the Would Jesus Eat Fry Bread event that they do,
Mm-hmm.
and which is a great event with a lot of Native students, and I was invited to be guest speaker, and building that relationship. We eventually I was invited to come on staff with Native InterVarsity and to be the director of spiritual growth and leadership development.
Great. I'm interested, if I can ask this. I was just having a conversation earlier with some Asian American pastors on the conversation or on the topic of what they call third culture leaders. Um, if I remember correctly, this idea of folks who grown up in one, or their families from one culture, they've grown up. So, for instance, immigrants, their parents are immigrants, they themselves are children of immigrants, having grown up in America, and they kind of have this third culture that they're living into. Um, would that be a fair description of many indigenous folks who find themselves navigating that in America today?
Well, being that Native people were already here, that makes us a little different than these other cultures who were imported here to this land.
Sure.
So, being the original people of the land and being a people who have been involved with treaties with the U.S. government and missionary outreaches and things like that, we've had to learn how to navigate between two worlds.
Mm-hmm.
We really many of our Native people live in two worlds. On the one side, they're pretty much assimilated and work regular jobs. Some of them, most of them, most of our Native people. And on the other side, we go to powwows. We connect as much as possible to our families. Some of our families still live on reservations, and so we visit those reservations and we participate in family events and things like that, cultural events and such. And a lot of times those two worlds don't cross.
Mm. Yeah, the conversation I had with them, they talked about how, and certainly there's, if not more so, a history of white American Christians trying to erase culture of indigenous persons. Um, and certainly it's true of these leaders I spoke to, but given that this, given that awful historical context, as I've talked to other indigenous persons, one of the things I've heard from them is the challenges of sharing Christianity with indigenous persons and native persons because of that long, dark, and awful history of Christianity. What does that look like in your context, and how have you dealt with that experience?
Well, for me personally, I didn't grow up in our native culture, so I didn't experience
Mm-hmm.
much of what a lot of our native people have experienced. And it has been tragic. As a matter of fact, I've spent a lot of time visiting. My wife and I spent 10 years on the road visiting native nations.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, Sometimes my wife and I played our music. We have music. As music at powwows. We visited tribal centers. We visit churches, and we tried to break down that barrier that exists, the misunderstanding that exists between our peoples.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of suspicion. Christianity, the way Christianity came to us, it came to us in a forced way,
Yeah.
and so the government was hoping to assimilate us
Yeah.
because it was a big problem dealing with all our tribes. And so what happened was the churches got involved with the government. The government gave the churches money if the churches would civilize the Indians, the native people. And so that history it's very difficult because we were presented with a more what we would call a colonial Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And that colonial Jesus was not the Jesus of the Bible, even though they were saying he was the Jesus of the Bible. And that's what made it confusing because the Jesus they were representing seemed very different than the Jesus of the scriptures. At least for me, it's that way. And for many of our native people, it's that way also. Very few of our native people will confess to be church members or even believers in Christianity. The word Christianity itself has a negative terminology that I try to stay away from.
Yeah.
I talk about being a follower of the Jesus way,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, it's a challenge. I ended up writing a book. It's called Sign Language: A Look at the Historic and Prophetic Landscape of America. To look at this whole issue and to say, what can we do today in today's world? What could churches do? What could individual Christians do? What to help facilitate uh, a, a you know a reconciliation or conciliation or healing between our peoples because there's still division there and it exists and it needs to come down, and we're hoping that this translation will be part of that process of helping non-native people understand native people and appreciate what we can bring to the table, what we can bring to the body of Christ. And the other side of it, that the dominant culture, the would begin to uh, care about Christian or care about native people,
Mm-hmm.
not just native Christians, but native people everywhere, and that they would have a new understanding. Uh, the Bible never hides the bad history.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all there for you to read. All the ugliness is there. But today there seems to be a tendency, and there always has been, to hide this part of American history.
Yeah.
It's been hidden in the closet, and it still has not come out the way it should. And our native people need to be able to heal and tell our story, and to be recognized that this really did happen to us, and that it really wasn't Jesus that did it. It was people who need to actually, you know, rethink of the way they brought Jesus to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard because there's been many generations of this.
Yeah.
And so people living today say, well, what have I got to do with all that? I didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you get to live on the land that they took.
Yeah.
You get to have the benefits that we lost.
Mm-hmm.
So you are part of this, whether you understand it or not. And so those are some of the things and some of the challenges that we have. And also, Native people have a different worldview. And even though we all speak English now, which is what this translation is based on,
Mm-hmm.
we all speak English, but we all still have some kind of connection. Some of us have lost it almost completely, but we're trying to recapture it. And in recapturing it, that's a challenge in itself. Restoring our languages is a challenge because
Mm-hmm.
90% of our people can't read our language,
Yeah.
and most of them don't speak the language anymore, even though in schools we're trying to recover it, and some tribes are doing better than others in recovering that. But those are some of the challenges. I'd recommend my book for you want to go a little deeper into it.
Yeah, I wish I'd had you on for that. So I might ask a follow-up question here if we have time. I'm thinking about just the little training I have in pastoral care. The harm it can do of basically saying to someone like, get over it. Essentially, and that's
Yeah.
so much of what like, white America has done to indigenous persons, to African Americans, to other people of color who've been marginalized. It's like, get over it already. And if I'm hearing you all right, it's just like, hey, like let us let us process it first, thanks. You know?
Well, the same people that tell us, "Oh, that's in the past. Get over it," are the same people who scream, "I'll never forget 9/11.
Yeah.
I'll
We'll never
never
forget
forget,
about it.
never forget." Well, our Native people, we have the same thing. We don't want to ever forget what
Yeah.
happened, you know, because it's important to own up to it.
Yeah.
All of us, Native people have a part in all this, and non-Native people have a part in it. And together, we're coming generations later from some terrible policies that are still not undone today. There are
Mm-hmm.
still things being done today by churches, by our government, that are still hurting our Native people. And those things should be addressed. And because we're only 1% of the population, it's difficult for that to be addressed.
Yeah, so I'm ordained in the Christian called Christian Church Disciples of Christ, a mainline denomination, and I part of my ordination process through the anti-racism training, and it was I had to learn about kind of these horrendous parts of my denomination's history, like the land rush in Oklahoma, where basically the denomination like just like was like, hey, the federal government's giving away this tribal land, go get it, go take it. And other instances of some of the things you're describing, what are residential centers,
Yes.
right? Like,
Boarding schools.
yeah, like things called it's now called the Yakima Christian Mission, I think, but it was again like a residential or boarding school that was sponsored by my denomination years
Hmm.
ago, and um, I was told the story of a young woman whose I think grandmother came back. No, no, she came back. Her grandmother was there as a child, and how like kind of the unstated mission of the, the mission back then was basically to deculture. I don't know what the word would be. Indigenous person, and she came back as like like a very white skinned, red haired girl, and she just I think if I'm remembering correctly, kind of lamented how like she was the result of sadly quote unquote successful deculturation. So it's a very troubling history, but like you said, especially for I think white people, we need to own up to what's happened.
Well, many uh, white Americans, so to use that expression,
Mm-hmm.
don't realize that, and they're followers of Jesus that identify as being Christians, don't realize that they've been assimilated into a culture.
Yeah.
They've been assimilated away from their Christian faith into another way of thinking that has influenced their Christian faith in a negative way and has kind of created a syncretism between America and its history and its mythology and their own Christian faith. And so when faced with that, it's a very difficult thing to own up to.
Yeah.
Wow, our ancestors, they did bad things. They were deceived, and gosh, I've inherited their deception. And now what do we do? Well, Jesus, the scriptures do teach us what to do. Make it right.
Hmm.
Do what we can to make it right. We can't restore everything, but what can we restore? We can restore dignity. We can restore harmony. We can restore relationship. That's what reconciliation is about the restoration of relationship. And that relationship needs to be on an equal grounding basis. I guess you should have me on. We're talking about the First Nations version translation, but you should have me on for my other book sometime in the future. Um,
Who's it published? Is it published through our friends at university?
yes, InterVarsity Press is publishing the New Testament of the First Nation
No,
version, and
your other book.
oh no, it's self-published.
Okay,
You can find it. You can find it on my author page on Amazon.com.
we'll get back to that.
Okay.
Let me ask though about the First Asian version, since that's what we're talking about. If I heard you correctly, it sounded like you were saying that the First Nations version in really ways helps both native and non-native persons kind of come together in a way. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, I think so. The First Nation version is an attempt to capture the simplicity, the beauty of our native heart languages, but transferring them over to English, but being faithful to the original language of the New Testament. And so the Bible becomes sort of a common ground that we're meeting on.
Mm-hmm.
We're meeting on this common ground, but we're looking at it a little bit differently, And so our worldview, the same as any other people group, our worldview influences the way we look at Scripture. And that worldview isn't necessarily wrong. It's just a way of looking and a way of seeing. And we believe that the Creator has given all different cultures these different worldviews so that we don't have a monocultural view of the Creator, of God, the Great Spirit. And so Christians sometimes have this monocultural view of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, and they think it has to be according to the way we do things in America or the way we do things in Europe. And so that idea is trying to be put on other cultures, and if you become like us, then you can follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And we're saying, no, we can follow Jesus the way we are. Every culture has good and bad in it. Every culture is judged by the Bible in some way and by the teachings of Jesus in some way. And we have to learn as the people of our own culture how to sort those things out and not be told which parts we can keep and not keep,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes
So
sense.
I'm still thinking back to your word and still processing about the idea of syncretism, which I really appreciate your perspectives on that because I think so often it's used disparagingly the other way. And I think you're
Yes.
bringing a really important light that, especially like you said, white American culture, Christian culture, it's that image of we're so often synchronizing with kind of the mainstream, I don't know, secular American, whatever culture, and that's the synchronism in its own way.
Yes. Yeah, whenever you blend Christianity with another worldview,
Mm-hmm.
and that's in many senses contrary to Christianity, contrary to the teachings of Jesus, but you try to make it fit anyway.
Yeah.
There's a mythology to America
Yeah.
that people have swallowed, and that mythology says we're a Christian nation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, if we were a Christian nation, would we have broken every treaty we ever made with Native people? Would we have stolen their lands? Would we have enslaved the African people? Would we have been involved in all that if we were truly a Christian nation? Absolutely not. We wouldn't have done those things. So that mythology gets mixed in with Christian faith, and so we have to learn how to sort that out. And a lot of times people are focused on, you know, little things like, well, how, it used to be holiness movement. Well, are you wearing long sleeves?
Yeah.
Do women wear pants or not? Do you smoke cigarettes? And all these things, become the focus of our Christianity rather than what does Jesus say? Mercy, justice, humility, forgiveness, all these things, and the breaking down of the walls between Jews and Gentiles, and slave and free, and all these different people. And so we have to sort all that out. Native people have to do it too. But we're saying, you guys, you guys are behind on this. You know.
Yeah. I want to touch on worldview, and I think I'll just like own like my own worldview and how hard it might be. You know, like it's thinking is the made on imagine. Like it's the air we breathe, the water we swim in. Talk about how your worldview, or the different worldview of indigenous persons, kind of has what's the word? Uh, played a role in the interpretation process of the First Nations version.
Well, understanding the meaning of things, like um, native people generally have, we don't have a two different views of what secular life is and what spiritual life is.
Sure. Yeah.
We have a united view. Everything's spiritual.
Yeah.
It's all united. And there are physical things and there are spiritual things that are spirit, but they're not divided. They're not separated from each other. They actually interact with each other. And that's what Jesus really taught us. Uh, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Let there be harmony between heaven and earth. Let there be harmony between heaven and me. So native people, everything is about harmony, bringing things back into harmony. Once again, our relationship with one another, our relationship with creation, our relationship with the animals and plants around us, and the earth itself. All these things are part of our worldview. And so when we hear Jesus talk about we're going to inherit the earth,
Mm-hmm.
well, we think differently about what that means.
Yes. Yes.
Okay?
Unfortunately, yeah.
So inheriting the earth means inheriting the beauty of creation and the harmony that Creator has put into it, and respecting creation and respecting the balance that that we need to work to maintain that balance on earth, rather than using the earth to draw all the resources out. We need to learn, what do we need to give back to the earth so that balance happens and so that harmony takes place. So that's just one of the things that affects the way we read the scriptures. Our daily bread, as you'll see when we do the Lord's Prayer, our daily bread is the elk, the buffalo, the salmon, the corn, the squash, the wild rice, all those things that we relate to as those things that are necessary to thrive on this planet, on earth and on the land, and to be in harmony, is to learn the ways of creation that Creator put in there, the laws of creation, and respect them.
Mm. Yeah. I want to ask too about you mentioned here earlier about how you use the word "creator sets free" as the name for Jesus. I'm intrigued by. I was reading through Matthew, Mark, the translation here. I forget what Isaiah was, but some of the different characters, John the Baptist, how they're named. Would you share kind of what went into kind of those name translations?
Well, one of the things that makes the First Nations version a groundbreaking translation, we've been told, is the fact that we are taking the meanings of the biblical names and bringing those meanings out. So everyone, their names have meanings. Jesus, well, first of all, the easy one is Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
What does his name mean? Father of many nations.
Right. Yeah.
Father of many nations. Before his name was Abraham, he had a different name. So his name was changed from honored father or exalted father to father of many nations, because Creator was doing something new with him and gave him a new name to match the new thing he was doing. And so all the names in the Bible, all the places in the Bible, there's meaning behind them. And sometimes those meanings reflect the story in the scripture and tell us something about that story. In John chapter 3, Creator sets free. That's who we call Jesus. Why do we call him that? Because his name means God, or Yah, Yahweh,
Mm-hmm.
saves or sets free or delivers. So his name is Creator, sets free, because he sets his people free from their bad hearts and broken ways. That's how we say sin, rather than using the word sin, which is a negative trigger word for our boarding schools, where the length of our hair was sin,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
speaking our language was sin, and things like that. So we've tried to decolonize the scripture, but using the names has been one of the things that we've gotten the most feedback on. Is what we did is we took the original meanings of the names, which can be found in different Bible dictionaries, and there's actually books out on it, and there's places on the internet to search, and you find these names, and then we gave them a little bit of a native spin to the meaning of the name.
Mm-hmm.
And so our the feedback from Native people, from First Nations people, has been, that's been the most significant thing, is reading the meanings of the names, because that was our tradition as Native people. Our names had meaning. I was given a naming ceremony, two of them actually, to get my native name. It's Gitchi Animiki Minomashkiki Manadu. What that means in Ojibwe is voice of the great thunder with a good medicine spirit.
Hmm.
And so the people who named me, my mentors who named me, saw some of these qualities in me and gave me the name based on those qualities through prayer and seeking Creator for a name. And that's what our Native people always did.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask then, like, is there plans to do the Old Testament? Because certainly there's a rich legacy, so many stories of characters in the Old Testament with the new and time deep meanings.
Well, you're the 10th or 12th interviewer that's asked me that.
Yeah.
Um, we would love to do the Old Testament. Um, it's a challenge. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's at least three times the New
Right.
Testament.
Right.
So we're praying about that. We've also prayed about doing a shortened version, a more narrative version of the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Like some Bibles have done a shorter, the story has shortened it down somewhat. We don't know. We're still praying about that, seeking Creator. You could join us in prayer, but we would also need people to say, hey, we're going to come behind you financially, because it takes time for me to lead a project like that. I have to dedicate almost my whole time to that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about like what Chronicles and all those names.
Oh,
How long
yeah.
that would take to do
It would take a long time.
that. All those names, just hard enough to read here sometimes in English. But um, yeah, yeah, it would be. I'd be very intrigued to read the Book of Genesis, for instance, from the First Nations translation.
Well, if you look at our prologue at the beginning,
That's right. That's right. Yes.
we bring out the first couple of verses of Genesis, which is sort of a loose translation there,
Mm-hmm.
which would give you a little bit of a feel. We also, in that prologue, have a couple of Old Testament scriptures from Isaiah, from Daniel, that we translated as a part of the project to fit into this story, the backstory for the New Testament. So,
Mm-hmm.
because we know the stories connect. And if you don't understand the connection, then you're going to miss some of the meaning of the story. I wonder if you wouldn't mind if I read uh, just one scripture.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
All right. So I'll pick one from Ephesians. People often ask me, well, I know the narrative, the New Testament is good, but what about the letters? Does it work there? And it actually does. Because what a lot of people don't realize, quick here, is that Paul's letters and every statement that Paul makes in his letters has a backstory to it in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And so the stories are there, the feel of the story is there. So Ephesians 2:23 through 24 reads like this: Take off that worn out and stained outfit of your past life. It no longer represents who you are. You are now true human beings with a new way of seeing and thinking. Put on the regalia of your new life, for you have been made new, created again to look like the one who made you, standing in a good way and walking a true and sacred path. So it gives you a feel for
Yeah.
how the wording is changed, but the meaning remains.
Yeah. book, it was almost, so many of us, hopefully it's not just me, the words become almost familiar,
Yeah.
and it's a fresh perspective, to me at least, so I appreciate it.
Well, we've had a lot of feedback from non-native people who really like this translation because
Amen.
it does exactly what you said. It takes those overly familiar words and gives new words to replace those, but words that kind of expand it a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
maybe like the Amplified does sometimes,
Yeah, yeah.
but it expands it in through another cultural worldview
Mm-hmm.
that begins to take away that monocultural view of creator of God.
And maybe I'm getting a little too deep here, but I think it'd be fair to say that, like, I mean, I think, especially white American culture at large doesn't realize we don't realize how different we are than ancient Near Eastern culture,
Right.
and I would think that indigenous culture is probably closer to
Absolutely.
ancient Near Eastern culture, right?
Absolutely, because the ancient Near Eastern culture, the culture of the New Testament,
Mm-hmm.
was very ceremonial.
Mm-hmm.
The Hebrew people were ceremonial. The Hebrew people had a united worldview. They believed in one great creator over all things, but they also believed in that he had spirits and helpers that helped him in this whole process of bringing life to the world and bringing revealing himself to the world, and that he created humans for that very purpose also to reflect who he was into the earth. Even though we totally failed on that, you know,
Yeah.
ducks do better at what they were created to do than we do.
Mm-hmm.
Animals do better at what they were created to do than we do.
Mm-hmm.
We're the ones that are really messing it up.
Yeah.
But also, we mess it up because God has given us His image, His creative power, and we're
Mm-hmm.
using it in destructive ways.
Hmm. That reminds me, and my son is being creative here right now. Here. I can't remember who I was talking to about this, but I asked him. His question is: creativity part of the image of God? Is that the image of God within us? And he
Well,
said,
it has to be part of that image of God because one of the primary ways to think about God is creator.
yeah,
In the
yeah,
beginning, what does the scripture opens up with? In the beginning, Elohim
mm-hmm,
created
yeah,
the heavens and the earth. The first thing he reveals himself as is a creator. And if we're created in his image, then we have creative, animals don't create. I mean, some of them build things, but it's all programmed into them.
yeah,
They never improve beavers never improve their their dams.
yeah, yeah.
They just stay the same forever. But human beings, through our creative process, have improved things as we go. So I have to believe that that's part of the image of our Creator within us.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'm gonna have to follow up with you later. We'll talk more about seeing if I can get you on again for the other book. But let's take a quick break, and we'll come back with some further questions.
Okay.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll jump right back in. My son aside.
Okay.
All right, we're back with Terry Wildman. You can take these questions as seriously or not as you'd like to. But if you're Pope for a day, what would be important to you, I say?
If I was Pope for a day, oh my gosh. I haven't. That question has never crossed my mind. You know, um, Native people don't even want to be chiefs.
Hmm.
Uh, because being a chief meant that you give up everything so
Hmm.
you can serve the people. you
Hmm.
know, and so
Thinking out
a
loud
lot of
here,
it's.
I guess.
But if I was Pope for a day, oh my gosh, I would just want to talk about Jesus and get people loving Jesus and loving his teachings and loving each other and focusing more on our relationships than we do on our differences and our disagreements and things like that. Trying to find common ground between each other, between our cultures, between our Christian ways of viewing the scriptures. Christianity is such a divided belief system, and that's one of the things that kind of drove our native people a little crazy. Is you guys? How do you guys expect us to believe this when you guys can't agree on it? Many of our leaders, that was the response to the story of Jesus. And becoming a Christian was, well, you Christians fight about the Creator. We don't want to start doing that. So I guess that's a quick question. I would never want to be Pope.
Fair enough. Fair enough. A theologian or historical Christian figure you want to meet or bring back to life?
Oh my. You know, I've always been, it's kind of funny. I mean, the standard, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is that I want to meet Jesus, I want to meet him, and stuff. But I've all my life, I've been fascinated with Paul,
Mm.
but I've learned to be more of a Jesus follower than a Paul follower.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I've learned to interpret Paul through Jesus instead of
Not
Jesus
the other way
through Paul.
around. Yeah.
And so but I'm still fascinated with Paul. What a, a place he had forming, and bringing together different groups of people. He had to bring the Jewish and Gentiles together, all the slaves and frees, and he had to try to get them to eat from the same table.
Yeah.
To have communion together. Oh my gosh. And the differences in working through all that. And there's just lots of things I wish could understand. We don't have theology all figured out.
Right.
We're all trying to figure it out. We don't have our eschatology nailed down totally. Oh, some people do, but I don't.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have my eschatology nailed down. You know, even I'm even looking at atonement theories and going,
Mm. Mm.
with all this. But I love theology, and so yeah, I wouldn't mind talking to Paul if we could communicate across our cultures.
Sure. Sure. What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Wow, that's a really good question. I don't know if I have the answer to that. History may look back, depending on which history, the history of the world or the history of America.
I mean, I leave it open ended on purpose.
Yeah. Well, the history of the world will look back at this time of a plague, a disease that's affecting the whole world,
Hmm.
and looking back at a time when some nations have privilege, other nations don't have privilege. Some people groups have privilege, other groups don't have privilege, and somehow maybe we're looking at all the turmoil that we're experiencing today. I always want to believe that this turmoil might be the birth pangs of a just society emerging.
Mm.
Maybe we're looking at justice a little more. Maybe we're looking at tearing down the walls of misunderstanding between us a little more. And maybe this will be the beginning of it, because it seems like we're more divided than ever, which means the only solution is we got to learn how to undivide.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going to kill ourselves, each other, you
Yeah.
know? So that's
Well,
my
that
two
kind of
cents.
that kind of leads into my next question: is what do you hope for the future? I'm guessing that would be for the hope, right?
My hope for the future is that this beautiful story that Jesus brought to us, would influence every culture, every nation in a good way, so that the message of peace, which is the first thing Creator sets free, Jesus said when he came out to meet his disciples, he said, "Peace be unto you. Peace be with you. Peace be with you." We don't see a lot of peace in the world. Actually, there's probably more than there used to be
Hmm.
if people would look at the bigger picture. But the future, uh, my hope is that countries will begin to work together instead of dividing and trying to take advantage of each other, and that people would do the same things. I guess it has to start with people before it's going to get to the countries.
Yeah.
And so if we would just start learning how to listen to each other, how to hear each other, and how not to push our beliefs on others and allow persuasion to be the thing and not force in any way. And that we'd live in a world where force is not used to get our way.
Yeah. Well, tell our listeners where they can find a copy of your translation and then find out more about you.
Well, to find out more, it would be to go to firstnationsversion.com. Firstnationsversion.com. And there you're going to find a little bit about us. You can contact us. You can look at our books there. You can look at the translation. You can learn how the translation was developed and who was involved in it and all that. We have a whole translation council with all the people, the pictures of the people who were involved in that council there. So that's the best way to find out about us.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I usually leave folks with a word of peace, but hearing you quote Jesus so much, speaking of peace, my brain went to John 14:27. So let me read it here from the First Nations translation. I leave you now with my great peace. It is my gift to you. It is not the kind of peace the world gives. Do not let the troubles of this world fill you with fear and make your hearts fall to ground. And do not let fear take you down.
Ah,
May
good
God peace
scripture.
be with you.
You too.